A police dog refused to leave the little girl's coffin, standing guard with unwavering loyalty, even as the funeral came to an end. The canine officer named Rex wouldn't budge despite commands from his handler, his eyes fixed on the small white casket. Nobody understood why this trained police dog was breaking protocol, until they discovered the hidden connection between Rex and 8-year-old Emma. What the officers learned next brought even the toughest members of the force to their knees, revealing a bond that transcended the boundaries between human and animal. This is the story that changed an entire police department forever. The small town of Riverdale had never seen a funeral procession like this. Police cars lined the streets, their lights silently flashing as Emma's tiny white casket made its way to the cemetery. At just 8 years old, Emma Mitchell had touched more lives than most people do in 80 years. Officer James Morgan stood rigid at attention, his K-9 partner Rex sitting obediently by his side as the casket was lowered. But then, something extraordinary happened. As the final prayer ended, Rex suddenly broke formation, something he had never done in his 5 years of service. "Rex, heel," Officer Morgan commanded. But the German shepherd ignored him completely. Instead, Rex padded forward and laid down beside Emma's coffin, his head resting on his paws, eyes never leaving the white casket. The crowd fell silent. The police chief stepped forward to intervene, but stopped short when he saw Rex's eyes, filled with what could only be described as heartbreak. "Let him stay," whispered Emma's mother through her tears, though nobody could understand why a police dog would form such an attachment to her daughter. But what the officers didn't know was that Rex's behavior wasn't just grief. It was a promise kept. Emma Mitchell was born with a rare congenital heart condition that made her childhood anything but normal. While other kids ran through sprinklers and climbed jungle gyms, Emma watched from windows and hospital beds. Her parents did everything they could to give her a normal life. But the reality of her condition meant frequent hospital stays and limited contact with other children. "It's for her own protection," doctors would remind her parents. "Her immune system can't handle unnecessary exposure." That spring, against medical advice, but desperate to give their daughter some joy, Emma's parents took her to the annual Riverdale Community Fair. It was there, among the cotton candy stands and carnival games, that fate intervened. The police department had set up a demonstration booth featuring their K-9 unit. Officer Morgan was just finishing a demonstration with Rex when he noticed a small girl in a wheelchair watching from a distance, her eyes wide with wonder. While most children approached Rex with excited energy, Emma's quiet fascination stood out. "Would you like to meet him?" Officer Morgan asked, approaching Emma and her parents. "Can I?" Emma whispered, her pale face lighting up. What happened next baffled even Officer Morgan. Rex, typically formal and professional during public demonstrations, gently approached Emma and did something he'd never done before. He rested his head in her lap, as if they were old friends. "He never does that," Officer Morgan explained, watching in amazement. "He's trained to keep his distance." Emma's small hand stroked Rex's fur, and for the first time in months, her parents saw their daughter laugh without restraint. Something passed between the girl and the dog, something inexplicable. "His heart feels like mine," Emma said softly, her hand resting on Rex's chest. "Fast but strong." That day marked the beginning of a secret bond, one that would eventually bring hardened police officers to their knees. What began as a chance encounter evolved into something the Riverdale Police Department never anticipated. Every Tuesday afternoon, when Officer Morgan was scheduled for community outreach, he found himself driving to the Mitchell residence with Rex in tow. These visits were initially logged as K9 public relations in official reports. But they quickly became much more than bureaucratic checkboxes. They became sacred appointments that neither man nor dog would dare miss. Emma's condition meant she was often too weak to leave the house, her small body battling against the limitations of her failing heart. The walls of her bedroom had been painted sky blue with fluffy white clouds to give her a sense of the outdoors she rarely experienced. Photographs of mountains, oceans, and forests, places Emma dreamed of visiting, adorned her nightstand. It was within this sanctuary that Rex found his most important mission, one that no police training manual had prepared him for. On days when Rex visited, her parents noticed a remarkable change. Her oxygen levels improved, her appetite returned, and the sparkle in her eyes, dimmed by years of medical procedures, reignited like stars appearing at dusk. The transformation was so consistent that Emma's mother began keeping a journal, documenting the improvements in her daughter's condition after each visit. "I don't understand it," she confided to Officer Morgan one afternoon as they watched Emma and Rex through the doorway. "The doctors have tried everything, but somehow your dog accomplishes what medicine can't." Morgan nodded, equally puzzled by the bond. In the field, Rex is all business. Focused, disciplined, sometimes even intimidating to suspects. But with Emma... His voice trailed off as he watched his partner gently nudge a giggling Emma with his nose. "Dogs can sense things we can't." Dr. Peterson, Emma's cardiologist, explained when Emma's mother mentioned the unusual connection during their next appointment. The doctor leaned forward in his chair, suddenly interested in this unconventional therapy. "There are documented cases of dogs detecting seizures, cancer, and even heart irregularities before medical equipment can. Perhaps Rex senses something in Emma's condition that creates this bond. The emotional benefit alone could be contributing to her improved vitals." The visits continued for months, becoming the highlight of Emma's increasingly difficult weeks. The hospital stays grew longer, the medications stronger, but Tuesdays remained sacred. Rex would lie beside her bed as she read to him from her favorite books. Tales of adventure and courage that transported her beyond the confines of her illness. Her small voice grew stronger when he was near, as if borrowing some of his vitality. Officer Morgan watched in amazement as his highly trained police dog, known for his intensity and focus in the field, transformed into a gentle guardian in Emma's presence. Rex, who could track suspects through miles of difficult terrain and apprehend dangerous criminals without hesitation, now delicately maneuvered around IV lines and oxygen tubes with extraordinary awareness. "He's never been like this with anyone else," Morgan confessed to Emma's father one evening as they shared coffee in the kitchen. "Sometimes I wonder who's really helping who here." The relationship between Emma and Rex became somewhat legendary within the police department. Officers who had initially scoffed at the waste of canine resources fell silent when they saw the photographs Morgan occasionally shared. Images of Emma smiling more brightly than seemed possible for a child so ill, with Rex's loyal form never far from her side. During one visit, when Emma was particularly tired after a 3-day hospital stay, her mother found her whispering to Rex, their faces close together in a moment of intimate connection. The room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of medical monitors and the gentle hum of the oxygen machine. "You have to be brave without me someday," the little girl murmured into the dog's ear, her thin fingers gently stroking his fur. "Promise me, Rex. They'll need you to be strong when I'm gone." The German shepherd responded with a soft whine, his eyes never leaving Emma's face, as if he understood every word. He placed one paw gently on her blanket-covered leg, a gesture so deliberate it seemed almost human in its compassion. Emma's mother stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of her daughter's words pressing against her chest like a physical force. She had always known this day would come, but hearing Emma speak so plainly about her own mortality shattered something inside her. Yet there was also a strange comfort in knowing that her daughter had found a confidant in Rex, someone who listened without the burden of human grief. What no one realized was that Rex's unusual behavior was actually serving a purpose beyond comfort. While the adults saw a heartwarming friendship between a sick child and a compassionate animal, something more profound was happening, something that would only become clear in the most heartbreaking of circumstances. The bond between them transcended explanation. Some of the more spiritual officers suggested that perhaps Rex could sense Emma's soul, pure and bright despite her failing body. Others wondered if the dog somehow understood the fragility of her condition in ways humans couldn't articulate. The department psychologist suggested that perhaps Rex recognized in Emma a kind of courage that mirrored the best qualities of his police training. Perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. Whatever the explanation, as summer faded into autumn and Emma's condition gradually deteriorated, the Tuesday visits became more frequent. Officer Morgan adjusted his schedule, finding reasons to bring Rex by the Mitchell home 3, sometimes 4 times a week. His superior officers looked the other way, understanding that some police work couldn't be measured in arrests or citations. "He knows when she's having a bad day," Emma's mother told a neighbor in hushed tones. "Before we even call, somehow Officer Morgan shows up with Rex. It's like they have some kind of connection we can't see." As the leaves changed and fell from the trees outside Emma's window, a silent understanding grew among all who witnessed the extraordinary friendship. Time was running short, but in the space between a little girl and her canine protector, something eternal was taking shape. A promise that would outlast the boundaries of life itself. The first snow of winter fell on Riverdale, like a whispered secret. Emma watched the flakes drift past her window, her breath fogging the glass as she pressed her palm against it. The white crystals danced in the glow of the street lamps, transforming the ordinary neighborhood into something magical. For a moment, Emma forgot about the constant ache in her chest and the way her lungs seemed to struggle for each breath. In that brief, peaceful moment, she was just a child watching snow, something so many took for granted. Her condition had worsened significantly in the past week. The hospital room that had become all too familiar over the years had started to feel like a prison of beeping machines and concerned whispers just outside the door. After a particularly difficult night, where Emma's heart had briefly stopped before being shocked back into rhythm, Dr. Peterson had finally agreed to allow her to return home, a decision everyone understood, but no one acknowledged for what it truly was: a final homecoming. She'll be more comfortable in familiar surroundings, he had told her parents in the sterile hallway outside her room, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken truths. "We've done everything medically possible. At this point, quality of life takes precedence." He paused, removing his glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose, a gesture that betrayed his own emotional investment in Emma's case. "We'll arrange for home hospice care. They're excellent, and they'll ensure she remains comfortable." The word comfortable had become a euphemism that Emma's parents had grown to dread. It meant the fight was over, that medicine had reached its limits. It meant preparing for goodbye. That evening, as medical equipment was being installed in Emma's bedroom, an oxygen concentrator, heart monitor, and IV stand transforming the once normal child's room into a miniature medical ward. Officer Morgan received an unexpected call from the police chief. "Morgan, I know it's your day off," Chief Ramirez said, his usually gruff voice uncharacteristically gentle. "But the Mitchell family called the station directly. They didn't have your personal number." Morgan sat up straighter on his couch, immediately alert. "Is it Emma?" "Yes. They're asking for you and Rex, specifically." The chief cleared his throat. "I've cleared it with administration. Consider this an official assignment if you need to." "No need, sir. We're on our way." Within 30 minutes, Morgan arrived at the Mitchell home, Rex trotting beside him through the newly fallen snow. The K-9 officer had seen many difficult situations in his career. Violent crime scenes, devastating accidents, moments of human suffering that would haunt most people. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of Emma's father standing in the doorway, his face bearing the unmistakable hollowness of a parent watching his child slip away. "She's been asking for Rex," he said simply, stepping aside to let them in. His voice was steady, but his eyes told a different story, one of sleepless nights and prayers that went unanswered. "She made us promise to call you. She said Rex would know it was time." Morgan nodded, unsure what to say. In the academy, they'd trained for hostage situations, active shooters, and high-speed pursuits. They never taught you how to face a dying child who had somehow formed a bond with your K-9 partner that defied explanation. The house was quiet except for the soft, mechanical sounds coming from Emma's room, the rhythmic hiss of oxygen, the occasional beep of monitors. The Christmas tree in the living room stood half-decorated, ornaments abandoned in open boxes, a testament to how quickly things had changed. A hospice nurse in navy blue scrubs nodded respectfully as Morgan and Rex passed her in the hallway. Her expression was kind, but carried the professional compassion of someone who had guided many families through this journey. Inside the bedroom, Emma lay propped against pillows, her skin nearly as white as the snow outside, her breathing shallow but steady. The room was dimly lit, with a string of fairy lights casting a soft glow across the walls. Medical equipment now occupied spaces where toys and books had once been. Her eyes, however, lit up when Rex entered the room, a flash of the vibrant child she had once been breaking through the veil of illness. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the equipment. Without waiting for a command, Rex approached her bed and gently rested his head on the edge of the mattress. Emma's thin fingers found their way to his fur, and Morgan noticed how her hand trembled with the effort of that simple movement. Rex remained perfectly still, allowing her to touch him without having to exert more energy than she had. "Officer Morgan," Emma's mother said quietly, appearing in the doorway. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she carried herself with the determined dignity of a mother determined to be strong for her child. "The doctors say it might be tonight or tomorrow. She's been holding on, waiting." Her voice broke, and she took a moment to compose herself. "Waiting for Rex. She insisted we couldn't call hospice until Rex was here. We didn't understand, but—" Morgan nodded, understanding immediately. "We'll stay," he said, his decision made without hesitation. "As long as it takes. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. We're staying." The night deepened around them. The hospice nurse, who introduced herself as Marianne, checked vitals, adjusted medications, and spoke in hushed tones with Emma's parents in the hallway. Morgan caught fragments of their conversation. Comfort measures, increased morphine, signs to watch for, clinical terms for an approaching goodbye. Officer Morgan sat in a chair by the door, watching as Rex maintained his position beside Emma, never moving even as the hours passed. Occasionally, Emma would stir, and Rex would adjust his position slightly, as if anticipating her needs before she expressed them. Around midnight, something extraordinary happened. Emma, who had been drifting in and out of consciousness, suddenly seemed more alert. The fog of medication seemed to lift momentarily, and her eyes focused with surprising clarity. She beckoned Morgan closer with a small movement of her fingers. "Officer Morgan," she said, her voice surprisingly clear, "I need to tell you something important." He leaned in, listening carefully, aware that whatever she needed to say required precious energy she had little of to spare. "Rex has a new job now," she said, her eyes intense despite her weakness. "He can hear heartbeats that are about to stop. That's why he came to me at the fair. He knew mine was different." Morgan felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the winter night. He glanced at Rex, who remained utterly focused on Emma, ears slightly forward, completely attentive. "He's been practicing with me," Emma continued, each word measured and deliberate. "Learning how to comfort people when their hearts are breaking, not just the person who's leaving, but the ones staying behind, too." She paused, gathering strength, her small chest rising with a determined breath. "There are other kids like me, in hospitals, and parents who need him. People who get bad news and feel all alone. That's his real job." Morgan looked at Rex, who remained utterly focused on Emma, and for the first time, he wondered if there was something his K9 partner understood that he didn't. Something beyond training, beyond even the natural bond between humans and dogs. Something almost spiritual. "I promise," Morgan said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was promising. To honor this strange connection. To recognize that perhaps Rex's purpose extended beyond police work. Emma smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. "He needs to stay tonight," she whispered, "until it's done." Her parents, who had been listening from the doorway, entered the room. No one spoke of Morgan and Rex leaving. It was understood that they would remain. As the night grew deeper, Emma's breathing became more labored. Marianne, the hospice nurse, increased her medication, ensuring she felt no pain. She worked with quiet efficiency, explaining each step to Emma's parents in gentle terms. "The increased morphine will make her breathing easier," she explained. "It might make her sleep more deeply, but she can still hear you. Keep talking to her." Her parents took turns sitting beside her, speaking softly of happy memories and love that would never end. Emma's father recalled teaching her to ride a bike in the driveway, how determined she'd been despite falling repeatedly. Her mother spoke of bedtime stories and the made-up language they'd created together when Emma was 4. "Remember our trip to the ocean?" her father asked, holding her small hand between both of his. "How you said the waves were the earth breathing? I think about that every time I see the ocean now." And through it all, Rex remained steadfast, his eyes never leaving Emma's face, his body completely still except for the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. Officer Morgan watched in quiet amazement as his highly trained police dog maintained a vigil more disciplined and devoted than any he had ever witnessed in his years on the force. Around 2 a.m, Emma's grandmother arrived, having driven through the night from 3 states away. She entered the room with the stunned expression of someone confronting their worst fear. But when she saw Rex beside Emma, something in her face softened. "That's the dog she's been telling me about on the phone," she whispered to Morgan. "She said he was her special friend who wasn't afraid of goodbye." Outside, the world continued its slow rotation into deeper night. Occasional headlights swept across the ceiling as cars passed by, people returning from late shifts or holiday parties, unaware of the sacred space they were passing, where a child was teaching adults about courage, and a dog was demonstrating a kind of love that transcended understanding. At one point, Morgan stepped outside for a moment, needing fresh air and a brief respite from the intensity of the room. The snow had accumulated on the front lawn, unmarked except for his and Rex's earlier footprints. The night was perfectly still, stars visible between patches of clouds. He thought about how Emma might never see another snowfall or count another star, and the unfairness of it overwhelmed him momentarily. His radio crackled, the department checking in. He reported briefly, explaining the situation in clipped, professional terms that couldn't begin to capture what was happening inside the house. His sergeant, understanding immediately, assured him to take all the time needed. "The department stands behind you, Morgan, whatever the family needs." When he returned to Emma's room, he found her parents singing softly to her, a lullaby about moonbeams and dreams. Rex had somehow shifted position so that his body now formed a protective curve around Emma's legs. The hospice nurse checked the monitors and whispered to Morgan that it wouldn't be much longer. In the early hours before dawn, when the snow had stopped and the world outside was wrapped in perfect silence, Emma opened her eyes one last time. The medication should have kept her deeply unconscious, but somehow she fought through it for one final moment of clarity. She looked directly at Rex, a smile ghosting across her lips. "Good boy," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Remember your promise." Then, with a sigh so soft it might have been just another breath, Emma Mitchell let go of her struggle. The monitor beside her bed issued a single, sustained tone that seemed to stretch into infinity. As her parents moved to her side, overcome with grief, Rex did something that would later become the talk of the entire police department. He gently placed his paw on Emma's now still hand, held it there for a long moment, and then moved to sit between her devastated parents. He leaned his weight against them both, offering solid, warm support as they collapsed into their first moments of unimaginable loss. Marianne, the hospice nurse who had witnessed hundreds of deaths, later told her colleagues that she had never seen anything like it. How the dog seemed to understand exactly what the parents needed in that moment. How he positioned himself to physically support them both as their knees threatened to buckle under the weight of their grief. Officer Morgan, witnessing this, suddenly understood what Emma had been preparing Rex for all these months. Not just to comfort her, but to comfort those left behind. In that moment, watching his canine partner work in a way no training manual had ever covered, Morgan realized he was witnessing something profound, a calling that went beyond police work. Emma's grandmother, who had been standing in the doorway, approached Morgan with tears streaming down her face. "She told me this would happen," she whispered. "Last week on the phone. She said, 'When I go, Rex will know what to do.' I thought it was the medication talking." The next few hours passed in a blur of necessary arrangements and quiet grief. Morgan called his supervisor to explain that he would need the day off. The funeral home representatives arrived, speaking in hushed, respectful tones. Through it all, Rex remained with the family, moving between them, as if assigned to protect them from the worst edges of their pain. As dawn broke over Riverdale, painting the snow-covered town in gentle pink light, Emma's father approached Morgan, his face aged years in a single night. "I don't know how to thank you," he began, his voice raw. Morgan shook his head. "It was an honor to be here. Emma was..." He searched for words adequate to describe the extraordinary child who had seen something in his police dog that no one else had recognized. "She was one of the bravest people I've ever met." She told us weeks ago that when the time came, Rex would need to be here. Not just for her, but for us. He looked over at the German shepherd, who was now sitting quietly beside Emma's mother as she sorted through photographs for the memorial service. I didn't understand then. I do now. The story of what happened next. How Rex became the first official canine grief support dog in the department's history. How he seemed to sense when officers or victims needed him most. How he could somehow find his way to people experiencing the worst moments of their lives. Would become legend. How Officer Morgan would eventually establish a specialized canine unit dedicated to supporting families during tragic circumstances, inspired by a little girl who understood before anyone else what his partner was truly meant to do. How Rex would go on to comfort hundreds of people in hospitals, at crime scenes, and in the aftermath of unimaginable loss. How other police departments would eventually develop similar programs, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond Riverdale. But that would come later. For now, as the first morning without Emma dawned crisp and clear, Officer Morgan simply watched as his partner performed the most important police work of his career. Being present for a family when there were no words, no actions, nothing but unbearable pain, and the steady, warm presence of a dog who had made a promise to a little girl. A promise that would change everything. Spring came to Riverdale with an explosion of color that seemed almost defiant after the long gray winter. Cherry blossoms lined Main Street, their delicate pink petals drifting through the air like memories. In Westside Park, where the annual fair would soon set up once again, daffodils pushed through soil that had only recently thawed. The world continued its inevitable cycle of renewal, oblivious to individual sorrows, yet somehow offering solace in its persistence. 3 months had passed since Emma Mitchell's death. For Officer Morgan and Rex, those months had brought profound change, both professionally and personally. The night they had spent with Emma and her family had altered something fundamental in Morgan's understanding of his work and his partner. The morning after Emma died, Morgan had arrived at the station to request a personal day, still processing the night's events. His uniform was wrinkled from having been worn all night, and the emotional weight of what he'd witnessed sat heavy on his shoulders. Instead of the routine paperwork he expected, he found Chief Ramirez waiting for him in the lobby, along with the department psychologist Dr. Winters, and surprisingly, Mayor Hargrove. "We heard what happened last night," the chief said, ushering Morgan into the conference room where coffee and breakfast had been arranged. A small kindness that nearly broke Morgan's carefully maintained composure. "Emma's grandmother called this morning. She couldn't stop talking about Rex and what he did for the family." Morgan nodded, exhaustion evident in his face as he accepted a cup of coffee with hands that still felt numb. It was unlike anything I've seen before. Rex knew exactly what to do, how to comfort them. When Emma passed, he moved immediately to support her parents. It wasn't training, it was something else entirely. Dr. Winters leaned forward, her clinical interest evident. "In my 20 years of trauma response work, I've heard of animals sensing emotional distress. But what you're describing goes beyond instinct." The mayor, a practical woman not known for sentimentality, studied Morgan thoughtfully. "Officer Morgan, our community has been following Emma's story for months now. The connection between her and your canine partner touched many hearts. But what happened last night? A police dog providing comfort during such a profound moment. That's something special. Something that perhaps shouldn't be limited to one extraordinary circumstance. We'd like to propose something," Chief Ramirez continued, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a preliminary outline that had clearly been drafted in haste, but with considerable thought. The department has been discussing ways to better serve victims and families experiencing trauma. What if Rex became not just a patrol K9, but also a certified therapy dog for grieving families? Morgan looked down at the proposal, then at his badge, considering the expansion of what to serve and protect might truly encompass. Rex is still a police dog. His primary training is apprehension and detection. And yet, Dr. Winters interjected, he demonstrated an exceptional ability to provide emotional support in perhaps the most difficult human experience possible. That suggests a rare temperament that could serve multiple purposes. The proposal took shape quickly after that initial meeting. Rex underwent additional training with Dr. Eliza Thornton, a renowned animal behaviorist who specialized in therapy animals. Initially skeptical about retraining a police K9, Dr. Thornton was astonished by Rex's adaptability and intuition. He seems to understand the difference between his roles, she explained to Morgan after their fourth session. When the vest comes off and the therapy bandana goes on, he immediately shifts his body language. It's remarkable, almost as if he's been waiting for permission to do this work. Meanwhile, Morgan studied grief, counseling techniques, and trauma response protocols under Dr. Winters' guidance. He learned about the physiological effects of acute grief, the importance of nonverbal support, and how to create space for people to process devastating news. Together, they pioneered what would become known throughout law enforcement circles as the Emma Protocol, a specialized approach to supporting victims and families during their darkest hours. The program faced initial resistance from some corners of the department. Sergeant Miller, head of the K9 unit, expressed concern about wasting resources on social work when Rex had been expensively trained for police operations. The department's legal team worried about liability issues. Budget analysts questioned the allocation of an officer's time to non-traditional duties. But then came the Mitchell family's interview on local television. A raw, honest account of how Rex had provided comfort during Emma's final moments and the immediate aftermath. How his presence had somehow made unbearable grief slightly more bearable. The community response was overwhelming. Donations poured in to support the program. Other families who had lost children reached out, sharing similar stories of animals who had provided unique comfort during their darkest hours. Within weeks, the pilot program was approved. Rex became the first dual-purpose K9 in the department's history, serving both as a patrol dog and as a certified therapy animal for specific situations. Morgan's schedule was adjusted to accommodate both roles, with priority given to emergency response, but time allocated for planned therapy visits. Today marked another milestone in the program's evolution. Morgan adjusted his dress uniform as he and Rex approached the newly renovated children's wing of Riverdale Memorial Hospital. The morning sun glinted off the building's windows, and a banner announcing the dedication ceremony fluttered in the spring breeze. A small crowd had gathered, hospital administrators in formal attire, local officials making the most of a photo opportunity, reporters with cameras at the ready, and at the center of it all, Emma's parents. Mrs. Mitchell spotted them first, her face lighting up with a smile that still carried traces of grief, but also something new: purpose. She wore a blue dress the same shade as Emma's eyes had been, with a small pin on her lapel shaped like a dog paw. "Officer Morgan? Rex?" She embraced Morgan briefly before kneeling to greet Rex, who remembered her perfectly and responded with gentle affection, leaning slightly against her legs in the way he had learned provided comfort without overwhelming. "We've been waiting for you. It wouldn't feel right to do this without you both here." Mr. Mitchell joined them, looking both older and somehow stronger than when Morgan had last seen him. The devastation was still there in the lines around his eyes. But there was also resolution, the determined look of someone who had found meaning in loss. "Officer," he said, shaking Morgan's hand firmly, "thank you for coming, and for everything you've done to make this happen." The hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Eleanor Richards, stepped forward, microphone in hand. The crowd quieted as she prepared to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for this special dedication. 3 months ago, we lost one of our most courageous patients, Emma Mitchell. Many of you knew her story. Her battle with congenital heart disease, her indomitable spirit, and her remarkable connection with a police K9 named Rex. Cameras flashed as Rex sat at perfect attention beside Morgan, as if understanding the solemnity of the occasion. The summer heat shimmered above the pavement as Officer Morgan's patrol car pulled into the parking lot of Riverdale Community College. Rex sat in the specially designed K9 compartment, his attention focused intently on the building ahead. Today marked another evolution in their journey, one that neither of them could have anticipated a year ago. "Ready, partner?" Morgan asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at his K9 companion. Rex's ears perked forward in response, his eyes alert and intelligent. After 2 years working together in traditional police K9 roles and nearly 6 months in their pioneering therapy work, their communication had become almost telepathic. Morgan took a moment to straighten his uniform before exiting the vehicle. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, not just representing the department, but honoring Emma's legacy. He opened the rear door for Rex, who jumped down with practiced precision, immediately positioning himself at Morgan's left side without needing a command. The campus buzzed with summer activity. Students lounging on the quad, professors hurrying between buildings with armloads of research materials. Several people stopped to watch as Morgan and Rex made their way toward the main lecture hall, the striking image of the officer and his German shepherd partner drawing inevitable attention. A young woman approached, her hesitation visible. "Excuse me, officer? Is that Rex, the therapy dog from the news?" Morgan nodded, noticing her red-rimmed eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. "Yes, this is Rex. She faltered, then gathered herself. "My little brother was in the children's wing at Riverdale Memorial last month. Leukemia. Rex visited him twice." Her voice cracked slightly. "Those were the only times he smiled during the whole treatment. I just wanted to say thank you." Morgan had grown accustomed to these encounters, people approaching with stories of how Rex had touched their lives or the lives of their loved ones. Each one reinforced the importance of what they were doing, even as it sometimes felt overwhelming to be the recipients of such raw gratitude. "Rex remembers every child he visits," Morgan said gently, a statement he had come to believe was literally true. "I'm glad he could bring some comfort to your brother." "He's in remission now," she said, a smile breaking through her emotion. "He has a stuffed German shepherd he named Rex that he takes to all his follow-up appointments." After a brief conversation and a gentle moment where Rex allowed the young woman to stroke his head, Morgan and Rex continued toward the lecture hall. These impromptu encounters had become a regular part of their daily experience, constant reminders of the ripple effects of their work. The lecture hall was filled to capacity. Police officers, medical professionals, social workers, and therapy dog handlers from across 3 states. At the back of the room, a film crew from a national documentary series set up cameras. What had begun as a local program had blossomed into something much larger, drawing attention from law enforcement agencies and hospitals nationwide. Dean Harriet Chen approached as Morgan and Rex entered the building. "Officer Morgan, we're honored to host this seminar. The registration filled within hours. We actually had to move to our largest lecture hall to accommodate everyone." Morgan nodded, still somewhat uncomfortable with the attention their program had received. "I appreciate the support, Dean Chen. Though I should clarify, I'm not an expert. We're still learning as we go." "Sometimes the most valuable teachers are those still on the journey themselves," she replied with a smile. "Your presentation materials have been loaded into the system, and there's a water station set up for Rex near the podium." As they made their way toward the lecture hall, Morgan reflected on how much had changed. The Emma protocol had expanded beyond its initial scope, now encompassing crisis response for various traumatic situations, natural disasters, violent crimes, and community-wide tragedies. Rex had become the flagship K9 for the program, but 3 other police dogs had since been cross-trained in therapy work, creating a specialized unit within the department. Morgan thought back to the initial resistance they'd faced within the department. Captain Reeves, the old-school head of the K9 unit, had been particularly vocal in his opposition. "We train these dogs to track suspects and detect explosives, Morgan, not to be emotional support animals," he'd argued during the first departmental meeting where the program was proposed. "It's a misallocation of resources, and it risks compromising their primary functions." Morgan had understood the concern. Police K9s represented significant investments in training and resources. The idea of using them in a therapeutic capacity seemed, to some, at odds with their core mission. It had been Chief Ramirez who ultimately championed the program, seeing beyond the traditional parameters of police work. "Law enforcement is evolving," he'd countered. "Community trust is at an all-time low. If we have an opportunity to serve our citizens in their most vulnerable moments, that's not mission drift. It's mission fulfillment." The turning point had come 3 months into the pilot program, when a school bus accident on the outskirts of Riverdale left 2 children dead and 15 injured. Captain Reeves had been one of the first responders, arriving to find parents frantic behind police lines, children in shock, and first responders struggling to maintain order while providing emergency medical care. Morgan and Rex had been deployed to the scene, working quietly with the children who were physically unharmed but emotionally devastated. Later, Reeves had approached Morgan at the station, his usual gruffness tempered. "I saw what Rex did today," he'd said simply. How he knew which kid needed him most, how he stayed with that little girl who couldn't stop crying until the paramedics could get to her. He'd cleared his throat. Maybe there's something to this program after all. Now, 6 months later, Captain Reeves sat in the front row of the lecture hall, 3 of his senior K9 handlers beside him, all there to learn how to implement similar protocols in their own work. The audience fell silent as Morgan and Rex took their positions at the front of the room. A large screen displayed the program title, "The Emma Protocol, Integrating K9 Therapy Response in Critical Incidents." "Good morning," Morgan began, his voice steady despite his lingering discomfort with public speaking. "My name is Officer James Morgan, and this is my partner, Rex. We're here today to share our experience developing what has come to be known as the Emma Protocol, a methodology for utilizing specially trained K9s to provide comfort and support during critical incidents and medical crises." Rex sat at perfect attention beside him, his presence commanding respect even in this non-traditional police role. "I want to start by acknowledging that what I'm about to share began not with research or departmental initiatives, but with a little girl named Emma Mitchell, who somehow recognized something in my partner that I hadn't yet seen." The screen behind him displayed a photograph of Emma, not in her hospital bed, but from before her illness had progressed, standing proudly beside Rex at a community event, her smile radiant and full of life. Emma had a congenital heart condition that ultimately took her life at age 11. But before she died, she formed an extraordinary connection with Rex. A connection that transformed not only our K-9 program, but also how our department approaches victims and families experiencing trauma. Morgan paused, remembering the night of Emma's passing. How Rex had maintained his vigil. How he had instinctively moved to comfort her parents in the moments after she was gone. That night had changed him, not just professionally, but personally, altering how he viewed his role as a police officer and the true meaning of service. Police work often brings us into contact with people experiencing the worst moments of their lives, Morgan continued. We're trained to secure scenes, gather evidence, make arrests, all necessary functions. But what we're not always equipped for is addressing the immediate emotional trauma that victims and families experience. For the next hour, Morgan detailed the development of the program, the additional training Rex had received, the partnerships formed with local hospitals, the protocols established for deploying therapy K-9s to various scenarios. He shared case studies, careful to protect privacy while illustrating the profound impact of the program. He described how they had worked with animal behaviorists to identify the specific qualities that made certain police dogs suitable for therapy work alongside their traditional duties. An unusual combination of traits that included high situational awareness, natural empathy, and the ability to remain calm in chaotic environments. Not every police K-9 is suited for this dual role, Morgan explained, gesturing to Rex, who remained poised and attentive beside him. We've developed an assessment protocol to identify dogs with the appropriate temperament and adaptability. Of the 12 K-9s in our department, 4 demonstrated the necessary characteristics for this specialized work. He outlined the modified training regimen they had developed, how the dogs were systematically exposed to environments they would encounter in their therapy work. Hospital settings with unfamiliar equipment, crowded emergency rooms, the sounds and smells of medical crises. They were trained to recognize signs of acute distress in humans and to respond with appropriate, calming behaviors. The key distinction between traditional therapy dogs and our dual-purpose K-9s is their ability to assess situations and respond appropriately without constant handler direction, Morgan explained. A police K-9 is already trained to make independent decisions based on environmental cues. We're simply expanding the range of situations they're equipped to address. He clicked to the next slide, showing Rex sitting calmly beside a teenage girl in what was clearly a police interview room. The girl's body language was tense, her arms wrapped protectively around herself, but one hand rested on Rex's back. This is Alicia, a 16-year-old sexual assault victim who had been unable to provide a complete statement after 3 separate interview attempts. Traditional approaches had failed to help her feel safe enough to recount her experience. Morgan's voice remained professional, but those who knew him could detect the underlying emotion. With Rex present, Alicia was able to provide a detailed account that ultimately led to the arrest and conviction of her attacker. He advanced to another image, Rex lying beside a hospital bed where an elderly man sat, his face etched with grief, his hand buried in Rex's fur. Mr. Callahan had just been informed that his wife of 62 years would not survive the stroke she had suffered. Hospital staff reported that he had become non-responsive, refusing to speak with doctors or family members about end-of-life decisions that needed to be made. Morgan recalled that day vividly, how Rex had approached the distraught man with gentle persistence, gradually breaking through the wall of shock and denial. After 30 minutes with Rex, Mr. Callahan was able to speak with the palliative care team and ultimately make the decisions his wife had requested in her advance directive. From the audience, a veteran officer from a neighboring county raised his hand. This all sounds meaningful, but with department budget stretched thin, How do you justify the resources for what some might view as a non-essential service? Morgan had anticipated this question. He'd faced similar skepticism within his own department initially. Fair question, he acknowledged. We've actually found that the program pays dividends in several measurable ways. First, victims who receive immediate emotional support are more likely to cooperate with investigations and provide clearer statements. Second, the presence of therapy K9s has been shown to de-escalate tensions in volatile situations, potentially preventing further incidents. And third, the program has significantly improved community relations and trust in law enforcement. He paused, then added more personally. But beyond the metrics, I would argue that supporting people through their darkest moments isn't an auxiliary function of policing. It's central to our mission to protect and serve. Morgan clicked to a slide showing data from the program's first 6 months. Increases in victim cooperation rates, decreases in interview time needed to obtain critical information, improvements in departmental approval ratings, and perhaps most significantly, a 27% reduction in reported stress levels among officers who had therapy K9s present during particularly difficult calls. What we didn't anticipate was how this program would affect the officers themselves, Morgan admitted. Police work carries a heavy psychological burden. We're routinely exposed to trauma, violence, and human suffering. Having these specially trained K9s present doesn't just help the victims. It helps us process these experiences in healthier ways. A hand raised from the middle of the audience, a woman in a paramedic's uniform. Have you found any situations where the therapy aspect interferes with the dog's traditional police functions? Excellent question. Morgan nodded. We were concerned about that possibility, which is why we've established clear protocols for when and how these dual-purpose K9s are deployed. Rex remains first and foremost a police dog, trained for patrol and apprehension. The therapy work is a specialized extension of his duties, not a replacement. He explained how they had worked with K9 training experts to ensure that the dogs could mentally compartmentalize their different roles, responding to specific commands and cues that indicated which mode they were operating in. We've actually found that the additional training enhances their overall capabilities. These dogs develop an extraordinary level of situational awareness and adaptability. They become more attuned to human behavior and emotional states, which can be valuable in traditional police work as well. The presentation continued with a video compilation showing Rex at work, sitting calmly beside a child giving testimony about abuse, providing comfort to an elderly man who had just lost his wife in a home invasion, lying quietly next to a teenager recovering from a suicide attempt. In each scenario, Rex's presence created a tangible shift in the emotional atmosphere, allowing space for healing to begin. Morgan advanced to a particularly powerful segment. Footage from body cameras showing Rex and 2 other therapy-trained K9s responding to a mass casualty incident at a local shopping center, where a driver had lost control and plowed into a crowded food court. The dogs moved methodically through the chaos, somehow identifying those in most acute emotional distress and positioning themselves to provide comfort while medical personnel attended to physical injuries. What you're seeing here is something we've observed repeatedly. These dogs appear to instinctively prioritize those experiencing the most severe emotional trauma, Morgan explained. We're still researching the mechanisms behind this ability, but the working theory involves subtle physiological cues that the dogs can detect, changes in breathing patterns, heart rate, and stress hormones. He thought of Emma's insistence that Rex could hear hearts breaking, a child's poetic description that sometimes seemed more accurate than the clinical explanations. As the seminar drew to a close, Morgan opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up across the auditorium. How do you select which canines are appropriate for this type of work? Morgan detailed their assessment protocol, the series of controlled exposures and behavioral evaluations that helped identify dogs with the necessary temperament and adaptability. We look for dogs that demonstrate natural empathy, remain calm under stress, and show an intuitive understanding of human emotional states. Not every police dog has these qualities, in addition to their tactical capabilities. What specific training methods have proven most effective? He explained their graduated exposure approach, how the dogs were systematically introduced to increasingly challenging emotional scenarios, always with positive reinforcement for appropriate responses. We work closely with hospital staff, trauma counselors, and behavioral specialists to create training scenarios that accurately reflect the situations these dogs will encounter. It's a multidisciplinary approach that draws on expertise from both law enforcement and healthcare. How do you address the potential for secondary trauma affecting the handlers? This question hit close to home for Morgan, who had struggled with the emotional weight of their work, particularly in the early days of the program. That's something we recognized early on as a significant concern, he acknowledged. We've implemented mandatory debriefing sessions for handlers after particularly difficult deployments, and we've partnered with mental health professionals who specialize in working with first responders. He explained how they had developed a buddy system, pairing handlers to provide peer support and recognize signs of compassion fatigue or burnout. We're also mindful of scheduling, ensuring that handlers and their K9 partners have adequate recovery time between high-stress deployments. As the session ended and attendees began networking in small groups, a woman approached the podium. Her professional attire and credentials identified her as Dr. Samantha Rivera, Director of Trauma Services at Eastern State University Hospital. "Officer Morgan, that was incredibly informative," she said, extending her hand. "I've been following your program's development for months now. I'm particularly interested in the potential applications for our pediatric trauma center. We've found that children respond especially well to the canine therapy intervention," Morgan replied. "Rex seems to have a particular affinity for working with kids in crisis." Dr. Rivera nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I've been developing a grant proposal for a comprehensive trauma response program, and I believe the EMMA protocol could be a cornerstone component. Would you be open to consulting on the project? We're looking to implement similar protocols across our 5-hospital system." The conversation continued as they exchanged contact information, discussing potential collaboration. Morgan found himself both surprised and gratified by how far their small local initiative had reached. As Dr. Rivera departed, Captain Reeves approached, his usual stern expression softened somewhat. "Good presentation, Morgan. Solid data, practical applications." Coming from Reeves, this constituted effusive praise. "I've got 3 handlers interested in cross-training their canines. Think you could work with them?" "Of course, sir. We'd be happy to share what we've learned." Reeves nodded and then added more quietly, "That night with the Mitchell girl, I didn't understand it then. What Rex did, how he knew what to do." He glanced at the German shepherd, who sat patiently observing the room. "Still don't fully understand it, to be honest. But I've seen enough now to know it's real." As attendees filed out, Dean Chen approached again. "That was remarkable, Officer Morgan. We've already had requests to make this a regular seminar series, perhaps even develop it into a certificate program for law enforcement and healthcare professionals." Morgan thanked her, still somewhat overwhelmed by the response. As he and Rex made their way back to the patrol car, his phone buzzed with a notification. A text from Emma's mother. "Saw the article about today's seminar in the paper. Emma would be so proud. Dinner soon? We have news to share. The summer afternoon had intensified, heat radiating from the asphalt as Morgan opened the car door for Rex. Before they could depart, a campus security officer approached, slightly out of breath. "Officer Morgan, glad I caught you. We've got a situation at the Student Counseling Center. A young woman just received news that her brother was killed in Afghanistan. She's having a severe panic attack, and the counselors asked if you and Rex might be available before you leave campus." Morgan didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." The counseling center was located in a quiet corner of campus, its entrance discreetly positioned away from main thoroughfares. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Staff speaking in hushed tones, casting concerned glances toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. The lead counselor, Dr. Patel, greeted them with visible relief. "Thank you for coming. Melissa is a 20-year-old sophomore. Her brother was a Marine, killed by an IED yesterday. The notification officers came to campus to inform her since their parents are traveling abroad and couldn't be reached immediately." Morgan winced. Notification of military deaths was always handled with protocol and respect. But the impact on family members was devastating regardless of how the news was delivered. "She's experiencing acute symptoms, hyperventilation, dissociation, inability to process what she's being told," Dr. Patel continued. "We've tried standard grounding techniques without success. One of our staff saw your presentation last month and suggested that Rex might help." Morgan nodded, understanding the situation immediately. "Has she had any previous experience with dogs? Any fears or allergies we should be aware of?" "None that we know of. She actually mentioned having dogs at home when we were trying to establish rapport." Morgan knelt beside Rex, making eye contact with his partner. "Easy work," he said quietly, the command that indicated they were entering a therapy situation rather than a tactical one. Rex's posture subtly shifted, still alert and attentive, but with a softer aspect to his bearing. Dr. Patel led them to the counseling room, knocking gently before opening the door. Inside, a young woman sat huddled in an oversized armchair, her body curled tightly inward, rocking slightly. Her breathing came in short, irregular gasps, her eyes unfocused. A female counselor sat nearby, her expression conveying helplessness in the face of such raw grief. Morgan remained in the doorway, allowing Rex to assess the situation. Without prompting, Rex moved slowly into the room, approaching the young woman with careful, deliberate steps. He paused several feet away, sitting down and simply watching her, making no demands for attention. The counselor noticed them first. "Melissa," she said gently, "this is Officer Morgan and his dog Rex. They're here to help." Melissa gave no indication of having heard, her rocking continuing unabated. Rex waited another moment, then moved closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. He lowered his body to the floor, resting his head on his paws, his eyes fixed on Melissa with an expression of such profound attention that it seemed he was absorbing her pain. Gradually, Melissa's rocking slowed. Her gaze, previously fixed on nothing, shifted slightly toward the dog. Rex, sensing the subtle change, inched forward on his belly, his movement so gradual it was almost imperceptible. When he was within arm's reach, he stopped, waiting. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then, almost unconsciously, Melissa's hand reached out, her fingers just brushing the top of Rex's head. Rex remained perfectly still, allowing her to initiate contact on her terms. Slowly, her hand settled more firmly on his fur. Her breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, began to deepen and regulate. Jake loved dogs. she whispered. The first words she'd spoken since receiving the devastating news. He was going to get one when he came home next month. Morgan and the counselors remained silent, recognizing the fragile moment of connection forming between the grieving sister and the patient dog. He was supposed to come home, Melissa continued, her voice breaking as tears finally began to flow. He promised he'd be careful. Rex moved then, edging closer until his body pressed gently against her legs. With a sob, Melissa slid from the chair onto the floor beside him, burying her face in his fur as the full force of her grief finally broke through the shock that had held it at bay. For the next hour, Rex remained with Melissa as she cycled through waves of grief, rage, and disbelief. He absorbed her tears, remained steady when she clutched his fur too tightly, and somehow seemed to know exactly when to press closer and when to give her space. Morgan stayed in the background, providing minimal guidance, trusting Rex's intuitive understanding of what Melissa needed in each moment. The counselors watched in quiet amazement as the young woman gradually moved from acute crisis to the beginnings of processing. Still devastated, still facing an unimaginable loss, but no longer trapped in the paralyzing grip of shock. By the time Melissa's roommate arrived to take her home, she was able to stand, to speak coherently about arrangements that needed to be made, to accept the resources the counseling center provided for grief support. As she prepared to leave, she knelt beside Rex one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing her forehead briefly against his. Then, looking up at Morgan with reddened eyes, "How did he know what I needed?" Morgan had been asked this question many times and still didn't have a definitive answer. "Rex has a special ability to understand when hearts are hurting," he said simply. "A very wise little girl taught him how to listen." After Melissa departed, Dr. Patel shook Morgan's hand with genuine gratitude. "I've been a counselor for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what just happened. We could have spent days trying to help her reach the point she got to in 1 hour with Rex. He's the one who does the real work," Morgan replied, watching as Rex calmly accepted water from a bowl the counseling staff had provided. "I'm just the driver." That evening, after completing their shift, Morgan and Rex arrived at the Mitchell home, a place that had once been filled with unimaginable grief, but had gradually transformed over the past year. The garden Emma had loved was in full bloom, tended now with even greater care. New wind chimes hung from the porch, catching the evening breeze with gentle melodies. Mrs. Mitchell greeted them warmly, kneeling immediately to embrace Rex, who responded with the special gentleness he reserved for the Mitchell family. Come in. David's just finishing up in the kitchen." The house had changed subtly since Morgan's last visit. New photographs adorned the walls, still many of Emma, but now interspersed with images of other children, some in hospital settings with Rex clearly visible beside them. A large corkboard in the hallway displayed thank you cards, children's drawings, and newspaper clippings about the Emma protocol. "How was the seminar?" Mrs. Mitchell asked as they settled in the living room. "Overwhelming, to be honest," Morgan admitted. "I never expected this level of interest. We had people from as far away as Colorado attending." He described the day's events, including their impromptu visit to the counseling center. The Mitchells listened intently, their expressions reflecting both the pain of their loss and the comfort of knowing their daughter's legacy continued to grow. Mr. Mitchell emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "James, Rex, perfect timing. Dinner's just about ready." Over a meal of homemade lasagna, Emma's favorite, the Mitchells shared their news. Using the donations that had poured in after Emma's story went public, they had established the Emma Mitchell Foundation dedicated to supporting therapy animal programs in children's hospitals. We've already funded training for 3 therapy dogs at Riverdale Memorial, Mr. Mitchell explained, his voice carrying the pride of purpose found amid grief. And we're working with the pediatric cardiac unit to create a special program specifically for children awaiting heart transplants. Emma always said that Rex could hear her heart when no one else could, Mrs. Mitchell added softly. We want to make sure other children have that same comfort. Someone who understands without words what they're going through. She reached for a folder on the sideboard, opening it to reveal architectural renderings. The hospital has approved our proposal for a dedicated space, the Emma Mitchell Comfort Room. It's designed specifically for animal therapy sessions, with special considerations for immunocompromised children. The drawing showed a thoughtfully designed space with separate ventilation systems, easily sanitized surfaces, and comfortable seating for children and their families. Large windows overlooked a garden area, bringing natural light into what would otherwise be a clinical environment. The foundation is covering the construction costs and the first 5 years of operational expenses, Mr. Mitchell explained. We've partnered with 3 local veterinary practices to provide ongoing health monitoring for the therapy animals, ensuring they meet the strict requirements for working with medically fragile children. As the evening progressed, they shared stories, some tearful, some joyful, about Emma and the legacy she had inadvertently created. The Mitchells showed Morgan the Foundation's website, featuring testimonials from families whose children had benefited from therapy dog visits during medical crises. Mrs. Mitchell brought out a scrapbook, a collection of letters, drawings, and photographs sent by children and families who had experienced the Emma protocol in action. One page held a carefully penciled note from a 7-year-old boy. Dear Rex, thank you for sitting with me when I was scared about my operation. You are the best dog doctor ever. Another contained a photograph of a teenage girl standing proudly beside her hospital bed. Rex at her side, a sign in her hands reading, Last chemo treatment. The accompanying letter from her parents described how Rex's regular visits had given their daughter something to look forward to during months of grueling treatment. There's something else we wanted to discuss with you, Mr. Mitchell said as they moved to the back porch for coffee. The summer evening was perfect. Fireflies beginning to appear in the gathering dusk, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. The Foundation has been approached about publishing a book about Emma and Rex, their connection and how it sparked this movement. Morgan considered this carefully. While the program's growth was undeniably positive, he had always been protective of Emma's story, cautious about exploitation or sensationalism. What kind of book are they proposing? He asked. A children's book, actually, Mrs. Mitchell replied. Something that explains illness, grief, and healing in a way kids can understand, with Rex as the guide. She hesitated. Of course, we wouldn't proceed without your full support. Rex is as much a part of this story as Emma. She retrieved a preliminary sketch from an envelope, a beautifully rendered illustration showing a German shepherd sitting beside a hospital bed, a little girl with Emma's features smiling as she reached out to touch his head. The style was gentle but not saccharine, capturing the dignity of both child and dog. The author is a child psychologist who specializes in helping children cope with serious illness and loss, Mr. Mitchell explained. She believes Emma's story, how she formed this connection with Rex, how she recognized his special ability, could help other children facing similar challenges. As if understanding he was being discussed, Rex moved from his spot near Morgan to sit between the Mitchells, leaning gently against Mrs. Mitchell's leg and the way he had learned provided comfort. "I think Emma would love that idea," Morgan said finally. "As long as it stays true to what this has always been about, helping people through their hardest moments." They discussed the project further, how the book would be distributed to children's hospitals nationwide, how proceeds would support the Foundation's work, how it might help normalize the presence of therapy animals in medical settings. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Mitchell said, her voice taking on a more emotional quality. "We've been invited to speak at the National Conference on Pediatric Palliative Care next month. They want to hear about the Emma protocol directly from us, the family perspective on how animal therapy affected Emma's end-of-life experience." She reached for her husband's hand, drawing strength from the connection. "We'd like you and Rex to join us, if you're willing, to help tell the complete story." Morgan felt the weight of the invitation. Public speaking still made him uncomfortable, and discussing Emma's final hours remained emotionally challenging. But he also recognized the importance of sharing their experience with medical professionals who could implement similar approaches for other children. "We'll be there," he promised. Emma would want her story told if it could help others. Later that night, driving home with Rex dozing in the back seat, Morgan reflected on the unexpected journey of the past year. From a chance encounter at a county fair to a nationally recognized program, from a little girl's intuition to a transformative approach to trauma response. None of it could have been predicted or planned. His phone rang, the caller ID showing the station number. "Morgan here," he answered. "Jim, it's dispatch. There's been a multi-car accident on Highway 16, 4 vehicles involved, including one with a family. Fire department is requesting Rex at the scene. There's a child trapped in one of the vehicles while they work on extraction." "We're 10 minutes out," Morgan replied, already changing direction. "Tell them we're coming." In the rearview mirror, he saw Rex was already alert, sensing the shift in their evening plans. This was their reality now. Moving between worlds, from educational seminars to emergency scenes, from foundation meetings to the raw edge of human crisis. As they sped toward the accident scene, lights flashing but sirens silent, Rex had never liked the sirens. Morgan thought about how Emma had seen something in his canine partner that no one else had recognized. A capacity not just for protection and service in the traditional sense, but for a deeper kind of healing work. The highway came into view, emergency vehicles creating a chaotic light show against the darkening sky. Morgan could see the damaged vehicles, the frantic activity of first responders, the gathered onlookers being kept at a distance. And in the center of it all, where they were needed most, a space waiting for a police officer and his extraordinary dog. A team that had learned from a dying child how to be present in the hardest moments life could deliver. "Ready, Rex?" Morgan asked as they pulled to a stop. Rex's response was immediate. Alert, focused, prepared for the work ahead. Together, they stepped into the chaos, carrying with them the legacy of a little girl who had taught them both that sometimes the most important police work happened not in moments of heroic action, but in quiet presence alongside breaking hearts. The Emma protocol was about to face another test, and they were ready. As they approached the accident scene, a firefighter hurried toward them, his face streaked with sweat and soot. "Officer Morgan? Thank God you're here. We've got a 6-year-old girl trapped in the back seat of the blue sedan. The extraction team is working to cut through the frame, but it's going to take at least 20 more minutes. She's conscious, but panicking, which is making it difficult for the paramedics to assess her condition." Morgan nodded, immediately understanding the situation. "Is there access to speak with her?" "Yes, through the rear window. It's partially shattered, but there's an opening large enough to maintain verbal contact. Morgan knelt beside Rex, looking directly into his intelligent eyes. "Gentle work," he said quietly, the command that indicated a particularly sensitive situation involving a child in distress. Rex's demeanor shifted subtly, still focused and alert, but with an added softness to his expression. They followed the firefighter to the mangled vehicle, where the extraction team worked with hydraulic tools, the metal groaning in protest, as they fought to create an opening large enough to safely remove the trapped child. Through the damaged rear window, Morgan could see a small figure huddled in the back seat, her face streaked with tears, her breathing rapid and shallow with fear. "Her name is Lily," a paramedic informed him, voice pitched low. "Parents are both being transported to Riverdale Memorial, father with minor injuries, mother more serious but stable. Lily appears to have no major physical trauma, but we need to get her calm enough to properly assess." Morgan approached the window, Rex at his side. "Lily," he called gently. "My name is Officer Morgan, and this is my partner, Rex. We're here to stay with you while the firefighters help get you out, okay?" The little girl's frightened eyes darted toward them, widening at the sight of Rex. Is that a police dog?" she asked, her voice trembling.